Welcome to Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, a podcast that illuminates real solutions to common problems within the parking industry. I'm your host, Brian Wolff, CEO of Parker Technology, and in each episode, I'll introduce you to real parking pros that will bring their own tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks, parking a car. On the show today is Ross Allanson, CAP and CPP, the Director of Parking and Transportation at the University of Minnesota. Ross Allanson has been directly involved in the management of parking since '89. He has witnessed land use demands, changes to parking supply and rates, which allowed him to observe the impact on parking. In the past decade, he has focused on other transportation elements, including putting alternative transportation programs in place, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure improvements, micromobility, and transit. Ross holds not just one, but two parking certifications as a certified administrator of public parking, CAP, and a certified parking professional, CPP. Today, Ross is the Director of Parking at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. He helps lead and manage over 20,000 parking stalls, 4 million annual transit trips, and over 800 university vehicles. He has observed transportation interactions between parking, transit, and land use for over 35 years to provide insight into how people make decisions to choose modes of travel when making a trip. We'll get into all that. Ross, welcome to Harder Than It Looks.
Hey, welcome, Brian. Thanks.
It's great to have you. Oh, this is going to be, I can already tell we're not going to have enough time to get everything that I want to talk about, but we will get to a couple of things that will resonate with you, I'm sure, especially a couple of stories. So the first thing that I like to do is hand the mic to the guest and have you can go back as far as you want to go and just tell us your story from step to step. You've got a lot of really diverse parking experience, but there may be more. I learned something new about my guests every time we do this. And then ultimately we'll land where we are now at the University of Minnesota. Take us back and tell us the Ross Allanson story.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. I guess I need to start my story way back. Grew up in suburban Minneapolis. And my dad is, I will call him the ultimate entrepreneur and salesman. So a lot of upbringing was in a number of his businesses, et cetera. And one of the primary ones, he owned a small office building where they did shared services. And so to a number of tenants from various industry reps, like for Coca-Cola, or there was one that did Certifoam, and then he also had therapists, et cetera. And so in this small office building, I became really a jack of all trades, being the boss's son. Did the janitorial, I helped with maintenance, I helped with remodels, he was sold phone service in there. And then the number of his other buildings, we also had, for example, Ad graphics was one of the first vinyl graphics put on vehicles. And so I became a vehicle vinyl graphic installer in high school and just did any number of things. And after high school, I left and had a couple of years in Butte, Montana, where I thought I was going to become a geological engineer. And when engineering wasn't really my thing, I figured that out pretty quick. I transferred back to the University of Minnesota and met my wonderful wife, Tracy, there, my degree in economics. And because of my time out west, we decided we wanted to move out west. And ultimately, then I landed in Seattle. And of course, thinking I may sales bent, and connections with phones, I decided to sell small phone systems to companies. And the company I worked for didn't really, I'll say, align with what I would call my ethical world. And so I picked up the newspaper and responded to an ad in the newspaper for property management. And it was one of those times where I went in to meet with the guy and he said, "This is a little unique property management. It's parking." And it was fun because so I don't know if you want to continue or not with this interview, but I did. And ended up actually paying to get a job in parking. So ended up with parking in Seattle and working as their night supervisor and fell in love with it very quickly.
All right. Okay. So Seattle, Did you say Diamond Parking? It blipped on my end.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Diamond Parking yeah, it's the 800-pound gorilla in Seattle for sure. At least it's been there for a long time, probably 100 years, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah. 1922. So a little.
Yeah. 102 years. That's crazy. Okay. So then where from Seattle? How did you get back to Minnesota?
So I was there for about 10 years and did a whole number of things. You look at the jack of all trades and, of course,
Yeah.
phone background. So way back when in the early 90s, when Mr. Diamond heard that I knew something about phones, he decided that we needed to start a phone company in regards to payphones on our lot. So we did that. And that went along. It was an interesting gig. And of course, over time, I realized as I had this big brick Motorola cell phone thing, and a number of us in that world said, if the cost of these comes down and the cost of airtime comes down, payphones probably aren't going to be a future. So we moved on and ended up actually in 98, about 9 years in with the Diamond family, moving back to Minneapolis. I worked with my dad for just a little bit and then ended up at Fairview Hospitals and as their director of parking and transportation here. And I was there for just about 3 years, and then moved on to a gig with Standard Parking, Minneapolis and St. Paul area, running any number of different operations with Standard. And then was recruited to work with AMCO at the time, which was ABM Parking Services, as they were looking for some leadership with the new city of Minneapolis they had. So ended up there ultimately as their general manager, overseeing all of the off-street parking activities with the city of Minneapolis. And then at the U, Bob Baker retired and ended up at the University of Minnesota with one of the things as I was working at the city, I realized more and more that it's really a transportation network. As there, I had really gotten more into the transit infrastructure and how it integrates with parking, as well as the biking infrastructure, et cetera.
Yeah.
And one of my fun stories, the city of Minneapolis has 3 state of Minnesota owned garages that they run. And they were really into the garages, showers and bike lockers and, secure bike parking, et cetera. And the first time that gas went to $4 a gallon, we saw a lot of more people on transit and taking bikes. I remember we were in a meeting and I made a comment that just had everybody rolling in the floor because it was like, yeah, I can see that bikes are becoming more than a nuisance.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah.
So when did it go to $4 the first time?
I want to say that must have been in around 2009 or 10.
Okay.
It was crazy.
Yeah. Bikes were more than a nuisance. Okay. So Bob Baker was obviously a longtime director of parking at the University of Minnesota.
Yep. He had been there about 13 years. And I think I was at an IPMI conference and was talking with one of the city guys. And I says, where's Bob? I want to go say hi. And he said, he actually announced his retirement.
And you were like, ooh.
I went, ooh.
And were you their first choice?
I will say yes, because I got the job.
There's always a story about whether you're their first choice or not.
Yeah, who knows? I know it was down to 2, and the U has a pretty interview process that starts beyond just a paper form, but there's actually a group interview where I had to go in and sit in front of 9 or 10 different people from, that I would be working with and leading and et cetera, and put my vision for the future forward for the U, as well as answer all of their questions. So
I would say my guess is, based on just taking us through your 5 minutes of history, you probably were well qualified. You had lots of different exposures for sure.
I did. I had a lot of different parking background, and I'm sure that's a big part of what had it. In fact, I remember in my interview with the hospital, with Fairview Hospitals, one ex-presidents of St. Mary's, actually, became my mentor at the hospital. One of the questions he asked me, he says, Ross, I see you have 10 years of parking experience. So what I really want to know is that 10 years of parking experience, or is that 1 year 10 times?
Uh-huh.
And I never really had thought about it, but yeah, that's what, one of the things I guess even I'll use that question from time to time in an interview.
Yeah. Did I get 10 different exposures or 10 years of parking experience? That's good. Okay. All right. So then of all the aspects of parking that you have been involved in, which one's your favorite? Which one are you best at? Are they the same? And which one would you do if you had your choice? Which one would
Yeah,
you focus on
pure,
all the time?
pure parking wise, there's no question. And everyone knows this, event parking is my favorite.
Yeah.
So it is high speed, low drag. You never know what you're going to have happen. Inevitably, you've got to make hard decision on rates. You've got to figure out that you're going to get blamed for traffic backups. Nothing to do with parking. That's the reality.
Yeah. Okay. I threw this question in later, but it seems like a good time to get to it now. Of your all your pearls of wisdom around event parking, pick out your 2 or 3 favorites of the secret sauce of Ross Allanson and event parking.
The secret sauce of event parking. That's a great question. I would say you've got to plan ahead and be ready for starters. You've got to really have a good anticipation of what you anticipate will happen. You've got
Yeah.
to have a plan for when different parking facilities are going to go full, et cetera, and be able to know where those cars are going to be directed. This is more in my most recent experience in a campus environment,
Yeah.
but that's a reality. The other pearls of wisdom, one that I had really picked up through the city, is your entry and exit queues can make a huge difference. So one of the things that I will say that was the most difficult and challenging and is transitioning to pay at exit event park. And so that be a real opportunity that only really worked when I started figuring out that the city, which ended up designing into their facilities long entry queues and long exit queues. On an entry queue, as an example, if you can get enough cars off the street during a light cycle, of those cars end up your customers. If your gates are too close to the sidewalk, so to speak, then cars are just going to drive right by you and go try to find another parking facility to park at. And so that was a huge. And then the exit queues made a big difference when we went to pay at exit event parking, because now people could be upset that they were waiting and you were making them pay at exit after that event. But then when they couldn't get on the street, they realized it really didn't matter. They weren't getting on the street regardless.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And so you changed that. That's unusual to go pay at exit versus pay at entry. What was the thought process there?
The city had a really strong goal and desire to never raise gates, that missing tickets were everything. And the only way you were going to really ultimately minimize missing tickets was to have pay at exit event parking. And all of my colleagues and peers at the time said, it can't be done. You're crazy. And ultimately, what it came down to at its core is really a math problem. And people will laugh at me now because I'm all about how many cars per minute can we get in or out through a lane, and then just do the math. And having people tied up in a line for 30 minutes, they get it. You start getting approaching 40 minutes and they're really getting upset. And after about 45 minutes, you're getting some really angry people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the math. 2 things from that. First, I wrote a column one time that talked about keeping the line moving. I think psychologically, if you can
Yep.
keep the line moving, people are okay in line if it's moving. If it's not moving, people start to lose their minds really fast, including me.
Yep.
And then the second thing, going all the way back to one of the first podcasts we did a year ago, we were talking to Peter Lang, and I was so impressed how much coordination with the police and the city streets, Department of Public Works, that he did to reroute traffic temporarily to make the ingress and egress that much easier onto and off of A&M's campus. It was truly impressive.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's an element of that for you as well.
Absolutely. No, it's huge. We work with the city of Minneapolis on light cycle timing so that we can get all of that correct. We have signs everywhere on campus. We close roads, we redirect traffic. We have police officers at intersections. It's everything we can do to try to get people off campus as quickly as possible. Certainly for a football game day, when we have tailgating, people tend to come in more spread out. So the ingress is not as bad. But I will say post COVID, it has been crazy. Everyone got so used to just not much traffic and being able to just show up places. And now it's people show up 10, 15 minutes before a puck drop or a tip off, and they're frustrated that they can't get into the parking facility as quickly as they think they.
Yep. I am definitely noticing more frustration, more traffic post COVID. And what are we? We're 2 years. We're 3 years post COVID, really.
Yep.
It's taken that long, but now we're back to quote normal. And
Yep.
I liked COVID that way.
Yep.
I think everybody did.
I guess that's the final pearl of wisdom on event parking. It's how many lanes do you have to accept people? And
Yeah.
that's something that we've just recently done is through a lane expansion project. We're adding lanes primarily at entries to try and address that issue so we can have more lanes to get more people in more quickly.
Yeah. And then do you have a lot of reversible lanes as well?
We do. We actually, that's a great tool in the parking toolkit is to have that. And one of the key things that I've also learned through that is it's about redundancy and resiliency. If you have two and one goes down, you've still got one. If you have one and one goes down, you have none. That's something that I think people don't really fully appreciate in our parking world. I always used to joke that it's not like Target when you show up and 20 cashier lanes and they're really busy. And if two cashiers don't show up, okay. So you have 18 lanes.
Yes.
And in parking, if you have one in and one out and the attendant doesn't show up, you're out of business.
Yeah. It's not good. One in and one out makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up.
Yep.
For sure.
So
it's tough.
So we actually went in this lane expansion project. We actually went from that would be, call it a three driveway sequence to a four sequence where you have a dedicated in, a dedicated out, and then two reversible lanes in the middle. So so that
beautiful.
Can go 3 and 3.
I love it. Okay. All right. So let me grab onto a topic that you wrote up in your questionnaire. You said that the topic of the transportation system as more than the components.
Yep.
What do you mean by that?
So as I've gone through my career, when I started, it was all about, hey, you're either parking your car in our parking lot or you're coming to work on a bus. And it was like, how can I get you in my parking lot versus you're riding a bus? And then throughout time, especially at the time at the city, and then really here at the university, I've realized it is about the transportation network. And if you don't have good pedestrian infrastructure, people aren't going to walk. If you don't have good biking infrastructure, people won't choose a bike. If you don't have good transit infrastructure, they're not going to choose to take a bus. And then obviously the parking infrastructure is part of that. So it is really about what's the density and what's the infrastructure. And then hopefully you can build what works best for the community. Because if you have those other components that are good infrastructure components, well, people don't necessarily have to choose parking, even though as a general rule of thumb, I have come to learn that's still generally speaking people's preferred model. And it gives them freedom and choice and they can control their time, et cetera. And the only offset is if you can go hop on a bus and you happen to have a bus route that's close and it's effective, you can get where you want to go. That works great. If you bike or walk and you can do that and it's close and you don't have to battle whatever the battles might be in those choices, then you'll have people that'll do that.
Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense. If you want people to walk, you got to make places that are easy to walk. It sounds so simple, but I suspect others have run into the same challenges where we want them to walk, but we don't really have good sidewalks or it's dangerous or what have you.
I remember Ronald Reagan once said, usually the solution to complex problems aren't complex. They're simple. It's just they're hard. And
it's just hard.
And that's what it boils down to. It's hard for folks to justify how can we spend that much money on building out biking infrastructure as an example. And yet if you build out safe biking infrastructure, people will use it and they will often make that choice.
And what I find so interesting is you're talking about biking and in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where there's probably There's snow on the ground, what, 6, 8
Yep.
months out of the year?
It's mid-December to end of March-ish.
Oh, 4 months? Oh, that doesn't sound right. Okay.
But
Well, then
that's why we're the number one biking city in America. Don't let anyone else fool you. What it takes for us to be successful at biking here. And I think when the surveys that we take, we're typically between 7 and 10% of trips. So it happens here.
okay. So something else that just popped into my head about that's unique about Minneapolis. I have other customers up there, and one of the things that they lament is how price sensitive Minnesotans are to parking.
Yeah.
Have you found the same?
It's not Minnesota, Brian. I hate to tell you, parking is the most pure form of supply and demand I have ever seen. It is amazing. I remember back when I was with Diamond Parking and I had a lot of control and could change rates at will. And literally, you quickly found out, how do I maximize and I always focus on weekly revenue. The days can vary up and down, but at the end of the day, how do I put the most amount of money in the bank at the end of the week? And if you underprice your facility and you end up with completely full lots all the time, you're probably missing revenue. And if
Yeah.
you overprice it and you're sitting with only a half or three-quarter empty lot, then that's a different problem. That's on the daily side. I think that's the other piece of the puzzle is you've really got to understand that parking is that supporting land use. It's not people's ultimate destination. They're not,
Yeah.
other than guys like me, they're not saying, hey, let's go check this parking facility out.
Yeah. There's not a natural curiosity towards parking.
No.
I will say that whenever we go, so when we were in Minneapolis, we rented a car because we took our surrogate granddaughter with us, but we would have otherwise stayed somewhere close so that we could walk to the ballpark because it's dealing with parking around events is not something I particularly fond. Okay. All right. So now let's transition a little bit to Ross Allanson, the leader. So I have known you now for a better part of 8 years. I know you to be a very thoughtful, you can tell just by your analyzing everything that's going on in parking, you're a very thoughtful and a servant leader. I'm wondering if you have guiding principles that guide you every day around motivating people to show up to work and do their best work.
That's a great question. I think I tend to try and let people do what they would like to do, give them the basis, make sure that they understand what are we trying to achieve here, et cetera, and then let them do the best job that they can do and encourage them to do it. It's certainly that has had some interesting just from time to time. But I have generally found that's what people have done with me. They've let me just go best that I think I could do. That was Mr. Diamond always used to say, hey, I want you to run this like it was your money, your business. And if you do that and do it well, we'll be fine. And that's generally what I've done. There have certainly been times when I came into a new role or something, and maybe I assumed that people would be acting that way and they didn't. And I learned that it was more of a micromanaging environment that I was taking over. And I needed to figure out how to make that transition. Having a good team is really key.
Oh yeah. Putting people in positions to do the work that they want to do. Super key. Obviously a team is super important. I think so. Going back to the team that you had to have micromanaged, I suspect they didn't last very long under Ross Allanson. Is that fair?
No, because it was more about the culture that I moved into about changing that culture. I assumed that they knew their jobs, they knew what they were doing and they would know how to do it versus they had been micromanaged and said, here, you'll do this in this way and blah, blah, blah. And they got a memo every time they were supposed to do something. Assume that they would know their jobs. But
okay. So this sounds like a good story. Take us through how you changed the culture. Because in the end, that really is our job, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really changed. Culture is about that people understand that you are going to move to more of a macro than a micro, and that they start understanding how they need to interact. But then it's also making sure that you have information flowing to them. They know what's about to happen, et cetera. I'm going to give a plug. I don't know that have been the greatest that way, but We just went through a book study with our team called Leadership is Language by David Marquet, and it's phenomenal at helping to understand a couple of things. Number one, does your team have clarity on what the objectives are and what you're trying to achieve? And then number two, how are you using language? And the book is really focused on the language of what he calls red work and blue work. Red work being the idea that this is the work when you're actually working and you do it and you don't have variability and you just execute as best you can. Blue work is being more of the discussion and the hypothesis, and you want variability. You want everyone's opinion. You want the parking attendant's opinion. You want everybody's opinion. You want customers' opinions. You want get as much information and variability so that you can try to then create a hypothesis to test. Okay, if we change this in how we're doing our red work, what's that going to mean?
I love that. And that's parking is all about any leadership position or any business is about red work and blue work. I love it. Okay. I've written it down. We'll capture that in the show notes as well. And you can bet I'm going to download the book as soon as we're done with this podcast. So that's good stuff. Okay. Keep going. Any other pearls? Like what else? I'm sorry. Let me lead the witness a little bit, because one of the things that I also know about you is that you tend to have dirt under your fingernails. You tend to get your hands dirty.
Yep.
And so tell me about where that comes from. Maybe it was your father, but tell me about your philosophy there and how important that is to you.
It really comes from my day one in parking. And as that night supervisor, I realized cars were parked in parking lots day in and day out. And if you didn't know what was going on, where people were coming from, in fact, probably one of the keys to me is when I very first started, someone said, hey, parking is actually simple. You just need to know who's parking, where are they going, how long are they staying, what are they willing to pay, what are their options? And you figure that out and you win at parking. At least that's in what I'll call in the kind of commercial paid parking realm. But at the end of the day, that's really what it boils down to. Is yes, get your fingers dirty, get out there, make it happen. And then to your point earlier, when I started parking and I'd get out there and if a sign was crooked and I could go in my trunk and get a screwdriver and go fix it and straighten it, we'd go fix it and straighten it. And it's being out in the field. That's where we park cars. And there's no question about it. You've got to spend time. I know even to this day, every morning when I come into work, I drive through campus in 2 or 3 different ways. And ultimately, there's a few times a week where somebody's going to get an email saying, hey, I noticed this on my drive in this morning. Can you take a look at it?
That's fantastic. You're going to come right on the heels of, we just published one with Joaquin Rojas down in Miami. And he's been in parking for 15 or 20 years. And he was adamant about managers, leaders have to be in the garage on the ground with their folks because they have to know what's going on. So it's a punctuation mark, if you will. It's one of the things I love about parking people. They're so gritty, right? Top to bottom. They're the nicest people you'd ever want to meet, but they're also really gritty.
Yep.
So now let's talk a little bit about the 35 years you've been parking cars and the technological changes you've seen in 35 years. So when you started with Diamond, were you taking cash from a cigar box?
Pretty much, yes. In a couple of our parking booths, I would say it was as close to a cigar box as you're going to get. We had steel boxes with any number of stalls in them that were typically 60 stalls, and you'd go more if you needed more, and people would fold up their dollar bills and they come in the slot, and my crew would come and open up that box and would take a per meter slip. They'd record the time. And if I remember correctly, there were 4 columns on each slip. So the time would go at the top and they'd record the payments of each. They'd go chalk tires. If somebody wasn't paid, they'd write them a ticket. And then we'd come back later in the day. You'd open the box, you'd go again, you'd write the new payments down. If someone had overstayed what they had paid for, you'd write them a ticket. And then of course we had 35-gallon barrels that got placed on someone's car who had multiple tickets that were not paid. As the supervisor, of course, who ended up releasing most of those cars, that was me.
Yeah.
That was always a fun experience. And
so did you carry firearms with you when you were with all this money? And
Nope, not at all.
Wow.
I think that with just a thing, it was a good thing that the drug addicts and the winos didn't do math. I used to always be intrigued that the local convenience stores would get robbed for $50. And we'd always say, man, in the morning, I'm sure glad they don't do math, because if they knew what 5 times 60 was, a lot of risk.
Thank goodness they don't do good math. Oh my goodness. Okay. So you go from honor boxes with dollar bills folded up now to handheld device, LPR,
Credit card.
all of that. Yeah. Credit card only, all of that. Tell me how you managed the transition, and more importantly, how and the timing of when the technology goes in seems to be really important to me as well.
It's interesting because at one level, the core of what parking is hasn't really changed. It's just what are the tools that we use to
Yep.
collect the revenues, et cetera.
Yep.
Whereas as we went through, the biggest transition was to credit cards, and parking was probably the last industry in the world that went kicking and screaming into accepting credit cards. And my joke anyway, for a long time is PCI is for, right?
Oh boy.
Prefer cigar box instead.
Okay, good. I was worried that we were going to have to blip that out or something, but for the cigar box instead. Okay. All right. That's good.
But I think that I was working on, surprisingly, I was working on a payphone thing with US West way back when, and they had a little chip card that they would use to load money on so that people could pay for their payphone calls and I remember we were working with them, and one of the guys that could see that we were not wanting to accept credit cards. He says, you realize that the cost to collect cash is typically between 10 and 12% of your revenue, versus we're going to charge 3% for a credit card. And of course, I didn't believe him, and I had to go back and do my math stuff and quickly realized that they actually was not far off.
Yeah.
Well, all of a sudden, the concept of accepting credit cards became a lot easier from my perspective.
So that's a good little pearl. You wonder about, we fight this all the time, as you might imagine. If somebody sees the raw fees that we want to charge them, or the gross fees that they want to charge them, and what they're missing is the labor that that we are saving by literally putting virtual ambassadors in every lane.
That's right.
Versus having 10 people or 12 people or 15 people. And then just the aspect of around the clock and whether you can find reliable people anymore to actually do that job, which is a pretty hard job, actually.
No, you're absolutely right. It absolutely is. That's no question.
Okay. Interesting stuff. So any particular technology got your attention these days? What's most intriguing to you?
The most intriguing is really, I hate to say it, but it's really about how best to use AI in our world to analyze the data and make predictions and coordinate things. I know that's going to have an impact on our industry. I haven't quite figured out going to have an impact, or where is the value going to actually be seen. But it is that taking all these big data sets that we have access to and trying what information can it actually tell.
And have you started? What's a baby step look like for you?
I haven't started. And the baby step for me is probably just trying to see who's actually using it and how they're using it. And is it actually being effective? I'm listening to some of your past podcasts, and I think your folks who have been talking about how can we analyze different call volumes. That's a great example that I can totally see, even from our standpoint. How can we, first of all, get our data into a database that we can say, what are people calling us about? What are their frustrations? What's working, what's not working, and where the...
Yep. Yeah. I think we can, we are zeroed in on that for sure as a use case.
And I'll go back because one of the tactics that I learned for maximizing revenue was understanding all the different customer types. And so you had your daily parkers, and your daily parkers could be frequent. They become contract parkers or permit parkers. They're paying you for a month's worth of parking, and they're typically going to be there 21 days a month. Then you have daily parkers who may not be there 21 days a month. So it doesn't make sense, but they're parking all day, if you will. Then you've got your transient, which are, let's call it 5 or 6 hours or less. And so figuring out the value of revenue per each one of those stalls per day is really the key, that helped me understand, okay, if my monthly parking is generating the equivalent of $5 a day, let's say, in revenue, and my daily parking is $4.50 a day that someone pays me for an early bird, but gee whiz, my transient parking generates $8 a day for that stall. What I'm really trying to do is manage those three values to maximize that revenue for the stall.
Yeah. To get to stability versus variability.
Right.
No, it makes perfect sense. Okay. I could not let you get off the podcast without talking about two things. So I understand you have a story about a parking garage and a gun.
Uh,
Please tell us.
It was actually a parking lot. And so when I was that night supervisor in Seattle, we had this after hours bar. And of course, you can imagine that, first of all, collecting parking at 10 p.m., midnight from people who are going out is not always fun. So you had to have a staff there. And so we had a couple of parking lots, and I'd go in and check in, and we realized pretty quick that this is a rough crowd. So the first thing we did was hire some off-duty police officers to just be available. They'd go back and forth between the lots, et cetera. And so one of the guys that I had working for me, he had a great trick. He when someone would park and they'd say, we'd come up, hey, it's $5 for parking. And they go, I'm not paying you. He goes, yeah, I know. Isn't it stink that I got to be out here working and you get to go party? And they'd all of a sudden realize, oh yeah, I'm going to have fun and you're working. Yeah, whatever. I'll give you $5.
Nice.
So then I was covering for a guy one night, and these guys pulled in and that whatever. And they sat in their car, didn't get out. I let them sit for a couple of minutes and walked over, and they got out of their car and they were like, I'm like, okay, you guys got to pay for parking. Yeah, no, we're not paying tonight. We're not going to be here that long. No, you're going to pay for parking. This is the way it is. And so I said, I'll give you a couple minutes to think about it. And I went to another part of the lot and I got on my radio and I called down to the lot. I says, hey, could you send the cops up here? Just got a feeling. So then I went back over just a little before I thought the cops should be here pretty quick. Well, I ended up with these guys. I'm saying, no, you guys are paying now or you're leaving. And that's just the way it is. And this guy, he is wearing a coat and he reaches his hand under his coat and he goes, I think we're going to have a different discussion. And just then the cops walk around the corner and they see the cops and he pulls his hand out and he goes, yeah, okay, we'll leave. so, so that was like a night. I Tuesdays to Saturdays, but Monday morning I went in, saw my boss and said, hey, could we get some bulletproof vests? It's getting a little radical out here.
Wow.
Says, if you're needing bulletproof vests, we have a different problems.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, all right. So that is a good story. And it reminds me of one of my favorite phrases is that timing is everything.
Yes, it is.
Thank goodness your off-duty officers weren't detained doing something else.
That's right.
And they weren't timely.
Right.
Oh my. We're going to have a different discussion. All right. And then the second thing is I can't let you get off the podcast without talking about craps, of course, which are one of the ways that we've bonded. So how did you get into craps? Tell us the origin story of Ross Allanson playing craps.
Ross Allanson playing craps. Okay. It actually revolves around parking. Way back when we were having a conference in Reno, Nevada, and first time I'd really ever been in a casino to speak of. And one of our fellow parking supervisors was at the craps table. And I, of course, was just so intrigued with this game, sitting behind watching him. And I'm like, what's the deal? How does this game work? And he basically looked at me and said, Ross, it's complicated. Go get a book and read about it, which is what I ended up doing, is getting a book and then sitting and rolling dice and figuring out the statistic for myself. And it just went on. And then, of course, when I finally actually walked into a casino, it was in Poulsbo, Washington. It was an Indian casino. It was in one of these actually Tyvek, like temporary buildings. I have really no clue what I was doing, to be fair. I thought I knew what I was doing. At least I understood some of the bets. I walked up to the table and the guy next to me, he put the two aces or the two one dots, and then he threw them to the same spot. And I immediately thought, oh, that makes sense, because then you might tend to get the same number coming up.
Yeah.
Of course, it's hogwash. I know that. Anyway, so he started throwing the dice and he threw and got out pretty quick. But I walked up with my $35. I started throwing the dice. I held the dice for 25 minutes. For people who know craps, that's like a long time.
Yes.
Up pretty good. Then the next guy held the dice for 20 minutes and I was up even more. And the guy after him held the dice for another 15, 20 minutes. So 3 really long rolls in a row. And I looked down at my rack and I was up like $800
Off of 35.
off of $35. Then the next guy, he sevened out right away. And of course, by now I was being way too aggressive, but I walked out with $700 and immediately thought I probably need to work again since I found the game that you play and then an hour or 2 hours a day and walk away with $500. So whatever.
Yeah.
I'm still in the parking industry.
That reminds me of a trip that Sumner, my son and I went, we took to Vegas. I probably told you this story, but we went out there for 3 nights and it might've been 4 nights, but the long and the short of it is the first 3 nights we tore it up and yeah, we might've broke even one night, but there were a couple of nights where we had some epic nights on the craps table. I was never so happy in my entire life to get my clock cleaned on the last night because I was sure my son was moving to Vegas to become a professional craps player. So we got absolutely killed the last night. And so that was a good lesson for both of us. I learned the hard way that they know you're coming. So I got Vegas, as Tammy Baker once said to me. It's pretty funny. Okay. All right. We're coming around the bend here. I've got a series of questions. I call them lightning round questions, but they're not really lightning round because I'm going to give you an opportunity to give the full answer, but I ask everybody the same questions. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So question number 1, if you hear a phrase or if your colleagues hear a phrase uttered somewhere on the campus in your department or across the campus, they instantly know that is a Ross Allanson originated quote. What would it be?
That's a great question. I'm not sure that I necessarily know if there's one out there, but I would say the one that I like to use a lot is there's no right decisions or wrong decisions. There's only decisions. Oh, yes, stealing wrong. However, wherever you put the weight on the factors that are going into the decision is going to give you a decision. And it's like a Simon Sinek quote where he talks about efficiency and innovation. And he says, if you think about it, we're going to try something to be innovative. We're going to try, fail, succeed. That's not efficient. You can't really have them both.
Yes.
And so that's really one of the things that I try to empathize with people, especially when they're off trying to run their own situation, because tell me why you made the decision you make. What were the most important factors? When parking, we can deal with, you're going to run it as cheaply as you can and try to squeeze as much profit out of it as you can. We can run it on a customer service range where you're just going to try to have people have an amazing customer service experience. The hospital world it's all about customer service.
Yeah.
I've been in that booth when someone comes up in complete tears who has just lost a loved one and they've ticket and they think that you're not going to let them out. Yeah. Nope, this gate is going up and that power is in the attendant's hands. And I've worked for an organization that you would virtually fire the attendant that let someone out without paying.
Yeah. No, I love it. Okay. All right. So there are good decisions, bad decisions, but that somebody has to make a decision. Okay. All right. Good. All right. Next time I'll listen carefully for that. And when I'm in Minnesota.
The other one that someone just told me the other day that I say all the time is a lot of creeks make a river. And in other words, a lot of small things add up to a big thing.
A lot of creeks make a river. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll write that one down. That's good. Okay. So next question. What's the hardest thing you've ever done in your life? We'll get to parking in just a second.
This is actually an interesting one because obviously I've listened to your podcast. And so to me, there's a theme when I really reflected on this and I realized saying goodbye as my kids have grown up and moved out of the house and they're no longer coming back. Leaving a community when you've worked with a group of people for years and years and you're going to move on to a new job, a new opportunity. When you're leaving, we left Washington to move back here. Saying goodbye is really hard for me.
What a great answer. I couldn't agree more. And nobody's ever said that. And that is a great answer. Okay. Yeah. Saying goodbye. It's tough. All right. So what's the hardest thing about your parking job?
The hardest thing about my parking job, I will say one of the hardest incidents in my parking job was coming into work one day and we learned about 10 a.m. that the supervisor had committed suicide. And
Oh,
it was like you have these initial immediate, oh my gosh, the team started falling apart pretty quickly. And I realized in about 30 seconds that Ross could not fall apart here. Ross needed to step up, support the team, support everything that was going to go on. And it probably was 4 to 6 weeks before I actually could allow myself to grieve and to figure that happened. So that certainly was hard. I think,
wow.
yeah, it's hard. A number of the things that happen day in and day out. And a lot of them, I think we desensitize ourselves to,
For sure.
which makes it hard. There's no doubt about it. I'm not the most sensitive person in the world. And I'm sure that it's probably from all of the people that I've had to fire over the years, all of the customers who express their displeasure with paying for parking, with not allowing them to park certain places, et cetera. So
Yeah.
that's probably for me, one of the hardest things is figuring out how to have empathy and be a little more sensitive sometimes.
No question. It is, you're a product of all of the interactions you've had. And so when you're expecting to see shenanigans around, I don't want to pay for parking or what have you, I'm sure you tend to get
You do.
jaded. Yeah. So it's super hard to maintain an empathetic ear and doubt who really needs your help and who's doing a great job of acting. That's one of the jobs that I had early on is I was a cashier for 2 weeks as a management trainee in a bank. And I could tell you that felt a lot like parking and taking help calls as people were begging to get out because they told their story, and you had to figure out whether you were going to cash the check or not, and whether you believed their story. Now, sometimes it was cut and dried, right? It was Ross Allanson on the check, and I'm like, you just showed me ID that said you were Brian Wolff, so I don't think I just can't cash that check. Actually, I'm not allowed. Interesting. All right. So then if you could wave a magic wand over anything in parking and fix it, what would it be?
I'll go back to day one. People thinking it's okay to steal parking, whether that's staff, whether that's a customer. There's just this culture out there, and it doesn't matter who you are, what your occupation is. People just have no issue, it seems, from my perspective in my career. It's a steal parking.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories, there's a restaurant right across from where we had some parking meet. It was in line, long line, busy lobby. We're picking up our to-go lunch, and these two guys in front of me are talking about, oh yeah, do you always just park at those meters? You never need to pay. Nobody ever checks them, blah, blah, blah. Every time I come to get lunch here, and I just thought, am I going to say, hey guys, I got an idea for you. If stealing parking's okay, look how busy this place is. I bet you could walk out with your food and not pay. Why don't you do that? But I didn't.
And they would never think of that,
I
right?
would never think of that, right?
Never think of that. They'd never think of walking into a grocery store, grabbing their stuff and walking out.
No, but yet going and parking where you're supposed to pay and saying, whatever, they won't catch me.
Crazy. Okay. All right. So when you're not parking cars, what do you do for fun?
Of course, over time, that's changed.
Yeah.
For a long time, we were real hiking, camping. That's where we went out and spent a lot of time with our kids. I have always, one of my favorite hobbies is gardening. I've tried it all, hydroponics, you name it. It's like, how many different ways can we have plants, et cetera? And then you've touched on one of my other favorites, figuring out how to beat the odds, growing a pair of on a table and putting real money to it so that there's real pain in the loss and real excitement in the win.
Yeah. Two's up with touching sixes. That's all I remember.
Touching sixes.
And it doesn't seem to work for me at all. I think it's user error, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. And then I can't resist, but it looks like that you've got a grandson that's popping his head up over your shoulder there a little bit. You probably have a little fun with grandkids every once in a while now.
Yes, we do. They're too far away at half a country away. That is certainly one of our joys, is getting to spend time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, last question. And I'll give you two, because if you go to your family, then I want something else, right? You can absolutely you can be proud of your family and raising kids, but what are you most proud of?
Okay, so yes, having 4 kids and seeing them launch into the world and follow their passions and be successful is certainly there. In my parking world and in my parking career, I would say it's actually having event parking pay at exit work, because it's one of those realities that, when I got into that and was tasked with how do you make this happen, literally there wasn't a person in my peer world that said you could do it. And so seeing it work, that the Minnesota Timberwolves fans all had to pay at exit for parking was really a thing, if you will.
Yeah.
And not sure that I was ever going to actually be able to pull it off. And the stars lined up in the sense that the people who would most complain didn't have the power to change it. So we could actually push it through to success until everybody realized that it would work.
That's awesome. What a great story. I love the odds stacked, the hero's journey of the odds stacked against you and everybody saying there's no way it's going to get done. And then you just used math. It's just a math equation.
It is. But granted, with that math equation came capital investment, because you had to have exiting capacity and lanes. And we just happened to have a unique situation in that case where the target center that hosted the Timberwolves and our skyway system, there was basically only 2 doors they could leave the arena from. And that meant that the time it took to dump the arena was close to 30 to 45 minutes. And so the people were arriving at their cars over, say, a 30-minute period. So no one actually had to wait much more than 15, 20 minutes to actually get out of a facility. So,
yeah, bravo. All right. Awesome. Okay. I have covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that I haven't covered that you had hoped I would ask you?
The only thing that I really had hoped is if you understood who took the first little brown jug. Okay.
I think Fielding Yost took the brown jug. Did he not?
It was 1892, and Minnesota won the little brown jug from the Wolverines.
Yeah. So you took the jug first.
Yes.
From Michigan Stadium.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Now
I have to admit, Brian, I did have to go to Wikipedia to get stats. Fortunately, Michigan has won 77 times. Minnesota has only won 25 times, but we have tied 3 times. So,
yeah, 77 to 25. Listen, 25. I didn't expect to hear that number. It must have been in the early 1900s.
No, it was the 1940s. There was a period where we were unbeatable. There was like 7 or 8 or 9 years that we won it. We won it the first in the early days. We won it a few times.
Yeah, that's good. Congratulations on those 25 times. Ross, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. It's been it has been, as I said, I knew we'd run long, which is good. It's okay. Lots and lots of material to cover. So I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. And I look forward to seeing you at the next show before we get to the craps table.
Thanks, Brian.
That's a wrap for segment 1. We're going to take a break to tell you all about our exciting user conference Fusion 25 coming in May next year. And then stick around. You're not going to want to miss hearing from my next guest, who will tell us all about something else that's harder than it looks, but not in parking. Stay tuned. Hey, Parker customers, want to connect, learn, and advance with the best in the parking industry? Then mark your calendars for Fusion 25, our exclusive user conference happening from May 27th to May 30th in 2025, right here in Indianapolis. Fusion 25 will be 2 days filled with sessions tailored to your partnership with Parker Technology, engaging workshops, networking, and exclusive access to new products and features. You'll also enjoy events and happy hours from some of our favorite spots right here in Indy. You'll leave the conference with a roadmap to make the most of our partnership, new connections with other Parker Technology clients, and fresh ideas to enhance your operations and customer experience. Don't miss out on Parker's inaugural user conference. Early bird registration opens on October 1st, but for now, you can visit parkertechnology.com/Fusion25 to save the date. We'll see you in May 2025. Welcome back to segment 2 of Harder Than It Looks. My guest for segment 2 is Kathy Wellik, a certified fleet manager and senior director of client success for Agile Fleet. With more than 17 years of experience in the fleet industry as a former director of Iowa State University's transportation services, Kathy joined Agile Fleet in 2022 to mentor and help other fleet professionals run successful fleet. Kathy is passionate about helping other fleet professionals provide outstanding customer service, size their fleet, and make their fleets more efficient while understanding all aspects of their fleet. Kathy is an active member and serves or served on various boards of directors and committees for the NASUF, formerly NCSFA, NAFA, NTEA, GFX, and the Big Ten and Friends Parking and Transportation Conference. She also teaches multiple NAFA CAFM classes, presents at several fleet events each year, and is the judge for the Sustainable Fleets Awards. Wow, that is a mouthful. Sounds like a big job. Kathy, welcome to Harder Than It Looks.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate this opportunity. And you did great with all those acronyms. Nice work.
That's a lot of fleet management, clearly. And we'll get into that here a little bit later as far as exactly what that means for you. Usually when we talk to parking folks, most people say, I didn't find parking, found me. And so my question to you is, you've built this storied career in fleet management. How did you get there?
By accident as well, as most people do, in all honesty. So fleet management is not one of those jobs that comes up on. Back in the day, I'm going to tell my age now, we had to fill out the bubbles for what careers we wanted to do. Yep. And nowhere did it say fleet manager on those little bubble tests as to what you wanted to do for your career. So prior to transportation, I was actually in banking. I always wanted to be an elementary school teacher growing up and so forth. That was my passion. That was my goal, helping people. But my parents were divorced, just being honest. And I thought I had to get in the work world sooner. So I did a 2-year business degree instead of a 4-year teaching degree. With that, I got into banking and finance and so forth. And an opening came up at the university. And my mom happened to work at the university, and she said, it's a great place to work. You got great benefits and stuff. I saw a dispatch job open there, and I'm like, well, that kind of sounds like fun. And the rest is history. I had a great mentor and so forth. I was always asking questions and wanted to know more about how it worked and this and that. And my mentor got a job offer to move out of state. And so I just stepped up to the plate, and I've been doing it ever since. And now by switching and going to Agile, I feel like I have the best of both worlds because I can mentor and teach now more fleet management, which is what I wanted to be in the beginning of my life, right? A teacher. Fleet is family to me, and fleet overlaps a lot with parking. And by accident, but would I change it? Wouldn't change a thing.
That's great. Okay. We have a couple of intersections. So I spent some time in Iowa back in the late 90s. And I worked for Johnson & Johnson at the time, and I had an entire state. I had 2/3 of Iowa, half of Illinois, and a small swath of Wisconsin was my district. And if there was a physician in the town in Iowa, I was there with my sales rep.
There you go.
So that's a lot of fun. And then obviously at Iowa State, you got a taste of parking. So as a dispatch manager, you were probably trying to help people get out of garages. Is that fair?
Actually, I didn't have to worry about garages. So the dispatching that I started was actually on the fleet side, so renting the vehicles out. But we had a flat lot. Now, parking I would work with quite often because they'd want to know who had our cars if they were parked inappropriately on campus. So it did help them a lot with that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's great. I've got lots of good memories from Iowa. My daughter was born there. Yeah.
Awesome. Where at?
We lived in Cedar Rapids for 3 or 4 years, long enough to settle in, if you will. So it was fun, but I spent a lot of time at Iowa State, a lot of time in Des Moines.
Awesome.
So lots of fond memories of Iowa. Okay. So you get into the fleet management business, you work your way up. and then you jump over to the vendor side, which some might say the dark side, right? So now that you've seen both sides, the name of this podcast is Harder Than It Looks. So tell us the hardest thing about fleet management and fleet operations.
Resources probably would be number one. So sometimes I feel that different organizations and so forth just forget why those wheels are still turning, because everybody owns a car, so they think that fleets just happen, right? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes I think the funding and so forth, and just people remembering that fleet is a thing and that they are the reason that you're safe in these cars and that the cars are still running and going down the road for you. And what I absolutely loved about the university setting is fleet was a city within a city, right? Because you have transit, you have police, you have dining, you have regular cars, you got pickups and everything. So it's like this whole city within a city. But when you have that, it's hard to know absolutely everything about every type of vehicle, right?
Yeah.
So if you have to know about a trash truck because you have to buy a trash truck every 7 years, okay, you haven't done a spec for a trash truck for a while, right? So that's where, again, it's so important, like these different organizations that I've belonged to and stuff, and like how I met Ross and stuff, is that you have these relationships with peers and so forth, and you're able to connect people. So you have resources to go ahead and find out that information. So just making sure that you think outside the box, that people know who you are, tell your story and so forth. Sometimes I think people don't want to tell their story either because they think they're being egotistical or something. How I feel storytelling is if even one person can get just a little nugget of something that will help them from a mistake I've made, hey, I've helped a person, right? Servant leadership. So
yeah, I love that. In fact, that's one of the premises of Harder Than It Looks, is to provide tips and tricks for people that either park cars or running fleets. So you said something that's really important, because I was thinking cars, but you named off 5 or 6 different vehicles that obviously you had to manage at Iowa State. How many vehicles did you have to manage at Iowa State?
650.
Okay.
Yeah.
650, including trash trucks and police and catering and all of that.
Yep.
Okay. What was the most unique vehicle that you had to maintain and take care of? Any Zambonis in there?
Oh my goodness. There wasn't a Zamboni. I thought it was funny. I had a client the other day that I have a client that is in the movie industry, right?
Yeah.
So they have bathroom trailers. And I said, I had a bathroom trailer where I worked. And they're like, really? They took them around to the state fairs, and it was an ADA compliant, how to do a proper bathroom trailer. So yeah, I think the most fun ones, we had a couple food trucks that were pretty unique. There was a police one that we did a partnership with the county and the city and the university to do a command center and so forth. Yeah. So that was a pretty fun, unique one as well. There's so many unique ones, it's hard to narrow it down to one.
Yeah, I'll bet. It certainly shed a new light on what you had to do. And probably I could imagine now that it makes your job, or it made your job, now you're on the other side, a little bit more varied than I imagined, which is, again, the whole point of the podcast, is to explain and talk about other things that are harder than they look.
Right.
So Ross Allanson, who will be segment 1 of this podcast, your segment 2, specifically singled you out. And I'm curious how you got to know Ross. And then it sounds like you're helping Ross up at the University of Minnesota now in your current position. Tell us how you got to know Ross and why he might have singled you out as somebody who's got a job that's harder than it looks.
So Ross, yeah, he's been a dear colleague and friend for a very long time. So I met him through the Big Ten and Friends Parking and Transportation Conference. So that was parking, transit, and transportation. And one of the first events that I went to for that was actually held at their location at University of Minnesota. And then in teen, he convinced me to hold it at Iowa State. So I had worked with him for several years, helping develop the program and so forth. Then during COVID, it was canceled. And then last year, brought it back by putting it on with the PI conference as well.
Yep.
And so he's just always been that great partner back and forth. They have been a client, so he was a peer of mine. So I knew him from being at Agile's user conferences as well. And I think just the outside of the box thinking that he does. So how we help them is just to really manage their fleet well. So we specialize in right sizing software, in which we also have key boxes so people can get access to their vehicle 24/7, 360 instead of having to be open that typical Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So really how to maximize these. If I ever have a question that I'm stumped or need to think outside the box on a fleet or parking question, I like to reach out to Ross, and he'll do the same with me. I love it when he has an idea, a new idea and stuff. And wouldn't it be great if this happened? What do you think of this? So I like his determination to think outside the box and continuous improvement, right? But sometimes that's hard because people don't change.
For sure. I think what I really appreciate about Ross is you're right. He is super determined to do things the right way, to do things the forward-looking way, but he's also a super pragmatic guy. He's not trying to put square pegs in round holes. He is trying to put square pegs in square holes, but sometimes he might monkey with the squareness of the hole to make it fit, is my impression of him.
That's a great way to say it.
Yeah. Yep. He's really good that way. Okay. You mentioned hosting Big Ten and Friends. I was actually at that conference. So I spent time on Iowa State's great campus. And the thing that I remember the most was the bacon for breakfast. It was the best bacon I'd ever had.
We tried to feed you well.
Yes, you definitely did that. So thank you for that. Thanks for putting on a good show. I recall that we had a lot of fun at Iowa State.
And did Ross tell you his great story about getting there?
No, I'm not sure. I might have met Ross for the first time at that conference.
Okay. I think he would be totally fine with me telling this story, but this is part of Harder Than It Looks as well. Okay,
good.
So as a fleet manager, you want to try out new technologies and so forth as well. Ross had a new electric vehicle. I won't name the brand, but he had a new electric vehicle, and so he was so excited that he wanted to drive it down to the conference. So I'm in Iowa, he's in Minnesota, a fairly close trip, and he decided he was going to drive it down to the conference. He had checked out ahead of time where chargers would be and so forth to charge along the way. When he got to, I believe it was Minnesota, I might have that part wrong, but I'm sure the charger was broken. So it was closed. So poor Ross couldn't get all the way to the conference. So poor Ross had somebody that was already at the conference come up and get him, had somebody else tow the other vehicle back to the University of Minnesota and so forth. But what is so great about that story is that it is harder than it looks. He wanted to make sure that his clients didn't have a bad experience. So he wanted to test it first. So when he tested it, there was a little blip, and then he can fix that for future. But there's so many of these new technologies and everything when you're trying to make sure that they work for your client before putting them out there in the open. It was just, we always laugh about that one.
Okay, I'm going to ask him about that. I have not heard that story before, so that's super fun. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure you're right. He won't care. He would laugh with us for sure. And he'll laugh when he hears this segment for sure. Okay, so then my next question is, Parker Technology also prides itself on delivering a great customer experience, good customer service. You mentioned that was a highlight or something important to you in your bio. From your perspective, what does it take to deliver a great customer experience? And does Kathy Wellik have a little secret sauce of her own to make the customer service that much better?
I think you can tell I'm pretty passionate about helping people. So
Yeah.
I think that helps me. To me, it's not just giving the client the software, it's giving them the experience behind the software and
Yeah.
so forth. I had a client I went and visited not too long ago who's trying to get one of his employees promoted to a different job level. And he's, would you look at this job description and see what changes would you make and so forth. It's planting those seeds of my way isn't always the best way by any means. In learning from experience, you can plant those seeds to see if they help anyone else. And I also think our company runs off of core values, and honesty and integrity is extremely important to me. So if I don't know an answer, I'm going to tell you I don't know an answer and I'm going to find it. I'm not going to make up an answer just to appease you. So I think the honesty, providing them with the pros and cons and what they're doing and so forth, and doing what you say you're going to do is important, and asking for feedback. I do a monthly webinar to teach folks with the tips and tricks and so forth, just because any of those little things that they can learn that will make their job that much easier or faster, I think it's important.
Yeah. I think so. We may get into this just a little bit with sort of the next question, because I think you're leading me there. I read off the alphabet soup of all of the organizations that you've either been involved with or been on the board of. And I read a blog post or a post on LinkedIn where you talked about the importance of becoming and being active in different associations. I wonder if you would just expound upon that thought and the importance of diving into these professional organizations to learn and to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. Learning is a constant for the rest of your life, right? The day you quit learning is the day you die. And so I feel it's so important to continuously learn. So I can honestly say NAFA, which stands for National Association of Fleet Administrators, was the first fleet organization that I was involved in. And they really focus a lot on education. And I could really see when my predecessor left, and as I was learning from him before he left, in going through their certification to be a certified automotive fleet manager, I could really see how the rates were built, how the replacement cycles worked, how nobody can know it all, but having those resources to know where you can go to learn the information and find the information is just so important. And that organization as well has an annual conference that has a big vendor show, a lot of educational sessions and so forth. And so with that, people can really learn a lot, stay up on the new technology and stuff. Now, some of the others, such as NASA, which is National Association of State and University Fleet, and it was formerly NCSFA. Hey, I got it right. Yay. They are a smaller organization that is focused just on state and university fleets, both public and private.
Yeah.
So it's a smaller organization, but it's really focused on those decision makers and so forth that are in like fleets, whereas NAPA has multiple different types of fleets, from sales fleets to utility to university to government, whereas the other is more government and stuff. So just being involved in those different ones, the different organizations, you meet different peers, you get different educational opportunities, different tools from each one as to how you can learn to better your fleet. A lot of fleets also have parking under them. So parking and fleets oftentimes work together quite closely and so forth. So it's just a good way to stay up on technology and education and peers. And so many of them have different listservs. And Fleet is one organization that I tell you what, to me, Fleet is family. If you put a question out there, you're going to have a bunch of people respond, right? They're going to tell you what they're doing. And it's not, I'm not going to tell them because I'm going to be superior. It's
right.
no, it's I'm going to tell them because I'm going to help them because we help each other. So.
Yeah. It sounds like the fleet folks are a lot like the parking folks, especially the university parking folks, where one of the things that's really refreshing is that they are not afraid to share their experiences, and they're not afraid to get out there and help as people are working through their own version of the problems that everyone faces, whether it's fleet management or parking, for sure. And then I think the other thing, that this feels like an ear tugger, if you will. In our previous podcast, Brandy Stanley, who had been super active in lots of different associations in parking. She ran parking for the city of Las Vegas and a couple others. She made a point of saying that she also jumped to the dark side, to the vendor side. And as she's touching some of these municipalities that don't plug into these associations as often, she really tried to encourage them to get to be active, because it did add so much value to her education, her knowledge, and then just the relationships that you make that help you ultimately get answers to questions when you're stumped. So in your background, or in the backgrounder that you put together for us, you made a point of saying how proud you were of all the success you've had as a woman in a male-dominated industry. So I wonder, to what do you attribute that success?
I would say determination. Again, I don't blame my parents for being divorced, but honestly, it goes back to that. I've been very independent my whole life.
Yeah.
I have been independent from a very young age. So I have always relied on myself. And yes, my husband takes good care of me, but it's hard when you grew up that way. I love my parents dearly and so forth, but just that much, you have to work harder to prove yourself in a man's world.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories is one of our former presidents. It was his inauguration, and I had to drive his family and extended family from the hotel that you stayed at when you were at the conference onto campus. And one of his relatives said, "Wow, you're a woman and you're in Fleet?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I love it. I do a good job. It's a lot like banking. I was on the loan side and everything like that, the financial side. You bring that finance into the procurement and so forth and all this stuff." And I said, "So what do you do?" And she says, "I own a Napa store." So hello, she's in a man's world too.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And my husband is also a transportation director as well. So he does the K through 12 fleet for our local school district. Okay. And one of our daughters worked at the University of Northern Iowa's fleet while she was in college. So
I've been there too. So
yeah, go Panthers.
Go Panthers, indeed. Okay, some thick skin, some determination, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. I can do the job just the way you can. Yeah. I've got another podcast guest coming up here shortly. I was reading her bio, and she alluded to, obviously, parking is a male-dominated world too, or certainly was. And her comment was, "I just worked hard to prove myself, and I didn't care if I was in a male-dominated world or not. I was just going to get the job done." And I think that's ultimately what led to much of my success. I suspect you were the same way. That independence and the streak of, I'm just going to do a good job, and I'll stand out. We make it a point in segment 2 to ask all of our segment 2 guests who are not in parking to tell us their favorite parking story. So, do you have a favorite parking story that you would like to tell? You could tell more than one, because I bet you have more than one.
I absolutely have a favorite parking story.
Okay, let's hear it.
So my very first day on the job at Iowa State at Transportation Services, I was given an Iowa State University vehicle and told to go down and sign up for my benefit. So I drive it down there. An Iowa State vehicle comes out of the spot, so I just go ahead and put my car right in. I go into Beerster to go sign up for my benefits and so forth. I come back out and the car is gone. And so I call back to the manager and I'm like, "Hi, do you know what happened to the car?" And my new boss said, "You ought to be thanking me that I have a spare set of keys because I just saved you a tow bill." And he says, "Your vehicle is by Lake Laverne. Don't come back without a paid receipt of your parking ticket." So I took my keys, I walked down to the lake, I found my car, I went over to parking and I paid my little ticket. And that's when I realized university vehicles also have to have a parking permit in them. And they hadn't gotten that far in my training yet.
Oh my
So
goodness.
parking has been near and dear to me from the beginning. And I always loved working with Mark Miller and his team and stuff over there at Iowa State they're amazing.
That is hysterical. Of course you can pull into a spot that an Iowa State vehicle just pulled out of. I
Only
would
if
have
you're the
thought the same thing.
provost. Only if you're the provost.
What's funny is what I thought you were going to say is that you totally ignored the sign that said that this is where the president of the university parks, and you just pulled in and hopped out. But you need a permit too. That's hysterical.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, let that be a lesson to us all. You need a permit to park most times, or you got to find a way to pay most times.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. Okay. So what do you do when you're not helping manage fleets? What do you do for fun?
You bet. I love spending time with my family. So we have 2 grown daughters that just each got married this last year. So 2 wonderful son-in-laws.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so we love hanging out with them. We have 3 grand dogs and so forth. So we're in that next phase of life. My husband, like I said, is transportation director as well. And we like to travel. We have an RV. We like to go travel around and so forth and find new adventures. So I was telling you, today's the 16th. I just got back yesterday. That's the first I've been home since the beginning of the month. We took the RV and 9 people and we went up to Canada and so forth on
Nice.
on a trip. We just like to explore new areas and so forth and share with friends, have fun.
That's awesome. Did you catch some fish in Canada?
We did not. No, we went to a conference for the husbands and then just toured around multiple different places. Went up through. It's important where you cross the border, right?
Yeah, I was just going to ask how hard it was.
Ben and Jerry, so we went up through the United States and through Vermont to get in, and then we came back through Canada and Michigan to come back. So
wow, yeah, you went a long way. Holy mackerel!
Yes, we did. It was super fun, but just love to travel and see what this great world has to offer. And we've been blessed to go to Europe a couple times too, because we had an exchange student. So we have our German daughter Clara there. Another funny transportation story there is if you go to Europe, you can travel multiple countries in a single day. It's not a problem. They're all very close. Her family came to the U.S. to spend 2 weeks with us. They bought their tickets into Des Moines and out of New York City. I'm like, oh, honey, and how are we going to get to New York City? And so we ended up, because we aren't afraid, and at this point we didn't have our RV, we bought a used Little League bus, and we did a 2-week trip across the eastern United States. So
that's awesome.
They flew into Des Moines, and then we started our journey and knocked a lot of states off the bucket list and met a lot of fleet friends along the way, because these organizations, you meet different people and so forth. So we could stop and show them different areas of the country and have people that we know. So
that's fantastic. So I'll use a German, one of my favorite German word for you. That your trip was ausgezeichnet. Do you know what that means?
No, but I'm guessing outstanding.
Yes, awesome.
Yes.
Ausgezeichnet. Yes. It's my favorite German word of all time.
I'll have to remember that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay. All right. Wow. So talk about first class delivery of that German family. I bet they were thrilled that they had tour guides all the way to, what, did they fly out of Kennedy?
Yes, they did. Yes. And then we also knew people at New York PD. So we got tours of 1PP and so forth as well.
No, that's awesome.
So yeah, it was pretty good. Everybody got to pick places to go. Chicago Cubs game, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Ohio, Pittsburgh. Yeah, we did it all.
That's fantastic. What a great story. Okay. Life stories indeed. Okay. So the last question is, what question haven't I asked you? Or is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think is important to get out into into my millions of podcast listeners? Millions of podcast listeners.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. If you were to be a car, what would you be and why?
If I were going to be a car, I own a 1969 Camaro that is in the process of being restored. If I could be any car right now, I would be that car done, because somebody's going to restore that car for me. And it's probably like building a house. I'm going to have to make a million decisions that I don't really want to make. And all I want is I want my car back. I told him I want a brand new 55-year-old car when I get it back. And fingers crossed that it comes back a brand new 54-year-old car, 55-year-old car that I can drive to the grocery store and the golf course.
Awesome.
Yep. Yeah. So I can't think of any better car to be. What kind of car would you like to be?
Okay. Mine you might think is silly, but I'm going to tell you mine. I would be my first car. It was a 70 silver Chevy Impala. And I think the reason why is just how much learning. It taught me gratitude, because my grandparents were able to hand it down to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had a car, right?
Yep.
It taught me resilience, because it had a 350 in it and so forth. It had to sit outside every day. But I tell you what, that thing started even in the Iowa snow.
Yep.
It taught me lessons learned. Homecoming, friends sprayed silly string all over it that will eat the paint. And so just like that learning and that experience, I feel I learned a lot from that car about life. And I think those are some of life's important lessons. And just take that car, take your life lessons, and go see the world.
That's awesome. So you said it was a 70 Impala, right?
Yep.
Okay. My family owned a 67 Impala, and that's the car that I learned to drive in when I was 14, driving around the block before my mom came home and she lost her mind because my older brother let me drive the car. So I have fond memories of a 67 Impala. And was this car a stick shift?
This one was not, but I did learn to drive a stick. My oldest brother taught me. He had gotten a, Ford Escort, buy one, get one free type scenario. Like maybe if you put all the parts together, you'll have one really good one. I don't know. Okay. But he put me in the get one free. So when I killed it at the intersections while I was learning, it'd still be okay.
That's hysterical. So you ended up with two, hoping you could get to one. Yeah. That's pretty okay. Those are really fun questions. Thank you for asking me about cars. I got a little insight into your early days as a driver. So that was really fun. Thank you for that. Okay. I think we'll leave it there then, if that's all right. I want to say thank you for joining me. I appreciate your time, and I can definitely appreciate why Ross has singled you out as someone that should spend time with us. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and for what all you do for the parking industry. So we appreciate you.
We have a lot of fun for sure. Okay, that's a wrap on this episode of Harder Than It Looks, Parking Uncovered, presented by Parker Technology. Please leave us a review if you liked what you heard. Make sure you tune in next month as we continue to uncover tips, tricks, and best practices to manage what we all know is harder than it looks, parking a car. Bye for now.